everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Liron Nunes-Weissman, and I'm the CEO at Joy Ventures. And we are very excited to kick off the first meetup in our From Science to Product event. And before I pass the mic to our moderator, Tzila, who will introduce our amazing speakers this evening, I'd like to say a few brief words about Joy Ventures and what we do for those of you who don't know us. With Joy Ventures, we are an investment firm and a venture builder focused on powering the next generation of science-backed mental well-being products. And in Israel, we are the only fund of our kind to be specialized in this field. And globally, we are actually also one of just a handful as well. And we partner with researchers, technologists, product specialists, and entrepreneurs, and offering support and funding across the innovation journey, from scientific research to product ideation, development, commercialization, and all the way to business growth. And we do this in three ways, basically. So the first, we fund and collaborate with academic researchers of both basic and applicable science on projects that can ultimately translate into consumer products and will advance the scientific field of mental well-being. The second way is that we incubate new companies founded on cutting-edge research by supporting entrepreneurs throughout the business building journey, from ideation to strategic product development, go-to-market positioning, HR, equipment and growth, community support, and long-term guidance. The third way is that we invest in highly innovative companies who are dedicated to building products backed by rigorous science. And although we have seen a rapid growth and an accelerated pace of innovation in the last couple of years in this domain, we still consider our field of mental well-being tech to be in really its early innings. And so alongside our core activities, we run a lot of different programs, events, and thought leadership content to ignite and facilitate inspiration and collaboration between our academic and entrepreneurial communities. And hope to ultimately help bring high-impact mental well-being products to life. This specific event, tonight's event, From Science to Product, is an embodiment of this mission and this movement. With that being said, I am delighted to pass the mic to our moderator this evening, Tzila Zak, who manages Joy's academic programs, to introduce our event speakers. Tzila, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Liron. And shalom, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Tzila, and I am the academic program manager at Joy Ventures. I'm truly thrilled to be introducing our two speakers this evening, Dr. Daniele Di Lernia and Rani Cohen. Both are working on incredible trailblazing innovations in the field of neuro well-being, and will be sharing with us today their unique perspective and experience from their journey of translating scientific research into real-world high-impact products. But before we begin, I'd like to invite you all to submit your questions to our speakers throughout the event by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And we'll make sure to address them right after both presentations at the end of this talk. So please stick around for that as well. Okay, so now for the main event. I'd love to introduce you to our first speaker today, Dr. Daniele Di Lernia, an adjunct professor and researcher at the Catholic University of the Sacred Heart in Milan, researcher in applied technology for neuropsychology lab at the Italian, I'm going to butcher this, I'm sorry, Institute of Milan, and an honorary research associate at the Royal Holloway University of London. Daniela's main research interests include interception, bodily perception, multisensory integration, and neuroenhancement, applied technology to enhance human well-being, as well as the study of clinical conditions such as chronic pain, depression, anxiety, and eating disorders. In 2017, Daniela developed a first iteration prototype that delivers non-invasive interoceptive stimulation in humans. The device is currently used across several research lines, exploring the effect of interoceptive stimulation at the biological, autonomic, and cognitive level to reduce stress, anxiety, and pain in healthy and clinical populations. Daniela is currently working with Joy Ventures to develop a wearable interoceptive technology for stress reduction. Dr. Di Lernia, the screen is all yours.
Thank you very much, Silla, and thank you, Joy, for having me. Let me see if I can share my presentation with you. Give me a sec, as usually. Can you see everything?
Yes.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much for the microphone, Silla. To the people that do not know me, I will simply say that I'm a researcher, and as Silla was saying, I spent the last 7 years working on interoception, that is the perception of our inner body, and developing technology to change this perception, how we feel, our body feels. I'm here today to share with you the work that I'm doing with Joy and the process that brought me here. But let me tell you this from the start, I'm in no position to tell you what's right or wrong in the path to bring something from the lab to the market. But the thing that I can do is to share with you my journey, and maybe in this you can find something useful for you as well. So starting from the beginning, let me put this here. It's difficult for me to pinpoint the very beginning of this journey. As far as I remember, I was always interested in going beyond and explore how science could do to improve our life or health or bodies, either repairing them, either enhancing their normal function. But I can't pinpoint exactly when I start looking to the inside of our body as the place as we need to explore if we want to improve our health. It was 2013, I was reading this quote from a French surgeon, and the quote was, "Health is life lived in the silence of the organs." And this sounds quite ominous, right? But stop for a second with me and try to think. When you are in health, you do not feel your organs. Your body does not draw your attention. Your body just serves you in your experience. It's your companion rather than an adversary that presents you to live the life that you want to live. But when, for example, you are in pain, your body starts to talk and requires us to pay attention to those words. For example, the knee that's hurting, the headache that prevents you to enjoy a pleasant evening, the stress, the anxiety, that feeling on your chest is dragging you down, all these sensations that we know very well in the past 2 years. And all these have a common point. There is a constant in all this experience. You feel your body. So I started my PhD studying the science behind how we feel our body. And this is interoception. So let me give you a definition. This is the same definition that I learned by memory and repeat to my students. Interoception can be defined as the sense or the physiological condition of the entire organism. And from this point of view, interoceptive sensation entail a broad range of relevant biological function, both conscious and unconscious processes. In a more straightforward manner, if you close your eyes right now and pay attention to the inside of your body, to your muscle, to your heartbeat, those are interoceptive sensations. When you feel your body angry, happy, aroused, stressed, in pain, when you feel in love, when you feel the butterflies in your stomach, in your belly, those are interoceptive perception. And interoception also covers unconscious sensation. This also means your immunological response, cardiovascular activity, hormonal activity, and so on. And on the left, you can see a list of different interoceptive inputs that goes from temperature to pain, down to anger, thirst, and so on, down to the bodily components of the emotions themselves. Everything you feel inside your body is interoception. And this is something that I always repeat to my classes. There is no experience in our life without our body. Our body is how we experience reality. Even if you are apart right now, I'm here in Italy, you are, I don't know where you are, Sila is in Israel and so on. We are here today with our body and in our body. And what you are feeling right now is shaping your experience and the experience of this talk. So you can start to imagine how important the interoceptive system is. The system at the very foundation of our daily life, our perception, well-being, and self-awareness. And to give you a quick but broad overview of the importance of this system, here's a list of scientific references where you can see in what clinical condition the interoceptive system is alterated and disrupted. It goes from chronic pain to eating disorder, stress, anxiety, depression, down to addiction and post-traumatic stress. And this is true for the clinical field, but also for subclinical condition, where, for example, anxiety and depression and maybe pain do not reach a clinical relevance. And this is to give you an idea about how important this system is, how broad its connections are. And therefore, I start wondering during my PhD, starting from the science, what if I could build a technology to change the interoceptive system, to change how we feel? You see, I start to see the interoceptive system as a core component and a gateway for our health. And therefore, the idea to developing scientifically grounded technology capable of accessing and changing the system, I thought it would be something important, quite a breakthrough in the technological field for mental and physical health. So I had this idea that the interoceptive system was at the center of our well-being, and this idea was supported by the scientific literature. And then I wanted to change, to modulate, to manipulate the system, and the obvious choice was via technology, because we are a technological solution. But I wanted this technology to be non-invasive, because if I have to open your skull and place a wire in your brain, okay, that's cool, but it's probably not for everybody, right? So from one side, the interoceptive system, the center of everything we feel, and on the other side, a potential technology able to modulate this system, able to modulate everything we feel. But to build a technology to do something with a specific purposes, you first have to understand what the technology must do. And our case was, the question was how to manipulate, how to access the interoceptive system, how can we change in a non-invasive way the activity of this system. And again, I went back to science during my PhD, and I started studying neurophysiology. It was quite far from my usual field of application. And you see that the interoceptive field is composed by a network of fibers that reach every part of the body, every tissue of the body, collecting information and relying this information to the brain. And surprisingly, these fibers, these nerve fibers, also reach the skin, the superficial layer of the skin, and are able to record touch. We have something called interoceptive touch. There are specific receptors on the superficial layer of the skin that, if correctly stimulated, can bypass any other system and speak directly to the interoceptive system. So I started to see these receptors, this peculiar kind of touch, not only as a sensing modality, but as a gateway to the interoceptive system, a way to reach the inside of your body, what you're feeling, from the outside, some sort of like finding a computer USB port on the skin, something you can plug in to start talking with the black box inside. Back then it was an hypothesis, a scientifically grounded hypothesis, but still an hypothesis. But at least I had a potential target for the technology, some kind of technology to stimulate these receptors. And to address this challenge, during my PhD, I developed the first iteration of the technology. We call interoceptive portable stimulation. You can see in the photo on the slide, esteemed. And this technology can precisely stimulate the interoceptive tactile system, inducing maximum firing frequency in the skin peripheral afferents. It has several limitations. For example, it requires an external operation, a stable setting, and so on. But in the past years, we performed and published several experiments with this technology to evaluate the effectiveness of this stimulation on different domains, in domains very far from one each other. For example, autonomic stress reduction, chronic pain reduction, and emotion recognition enhancement. Let me show you the results that we get so far. And these are the published results that we brought to Joy when we start collaborating together. We use the esteemed technology to modulate heart rate variability in healthy participants, and specifically the parasympathetic component. We reduce chronic pain independently from the pathology. It doesn't matter if you have musculoskeletal pain, fibromyalgia, migraine, or nerve damage. All our patients, after 11 minutes of stimulation, report the reduction in pain of approximately 23%. And that was comparable to pharmacological medication. But we also use these to enhance cognitive processing in healthy participants, augmenting their ability to process emotion. To be honest with you, we still don't know exactly, we have no clear idea why this kind of stimulation works. We have evidence in literature that point to 3 possible mechanisms: a neuromodulatory effect, autonomic modulation, and endocrine modulation. But in my opinion, the effectiveness of this kind of stimulation is likely a synergy, a combination of all these factors. And this can tell you the potential of this kind of technology and this kind of stimulation that works at the cortical, autonomic, and endocrine level at the same time. And this was the science and the preliminary evidence that we brought into the project with Joy. And as Sheila was saying to you, the aim of the project is developing a wearable interoceptive stimulator, able to deliver tactile inputs to the skin, mapping the user skin to self-calibrate, while also measuring the user physiological response in real time, thus providing a personalized treatment stimulation according to the user needs. And here you can see some features of this device that will be a research device at this point, because we still have to explore the possibility of this technology. It will be wearable, completely programmable, self-calibrating, as I said. It will integrate with different sensors to neuromodulate in a feedback loop, and we'll be able to also integrate with the lab equipment to study cortical activity and sync with virtual reality and augmented reality. And this was everything that we brought to Joy, and we start working together. So let's talk a bit about the process from science to product. That's actually the central topic of this talk. If I would have to summarize my process, my journey, I would say that everything started from science. The first step is, and always has been, science. My initial idea was also quite broad and not defining the relevance of our inner bodily perception in our daily life. I mean, it's quite obvious that the body somehow matters in our quality of life. But I started to study the science behind the perception of our inner body, behind interoception. And this gave me a solid background, not limited to my specific field of application, ranging from emotion to psychopathology, from mental health to physical health. And once I had a broader perspective, the key question was, how can I use this to make a change in our society? You see, this is for me something that's actually different from what you usually saw in other labs. In academic research, you generally start studying basic mechanisms, how things work and why, in what way, and so on. Only way later you start reasoning about how the things that you're studying can change society, can be applied to something. This is usually applied science. It's done by the industry way later in the process. On my process, this was my question on day one. And this question actually shaped the research of the technology back. For example, once I understood how relevant the interoceptive system was, following this very question, my next step was to try to find a way to access this system and change this system. Because if you can change how you feel, it can make a change in your daily life and therefore in the society as well. And this simple question, how can I use this to make a change in our society, shifted the science that I was studying. I was not focused on understanding why things work in a specific way, but my initial interest was how can I change this? And I'm not saying that the why is not important. For example, with Joy, we will collect a bunch of data at the biological, autonomic, cortical, and cognitive level to understand precisely why this technology works. We'll also collect blood sample to understand the hormones involved, the inflammatory, anti-inflammatory cytokines. But this was later in the process. The point is that the science at the beginning was driven by a simple question about how can I use this to change the society. And it brought me to think about the interoceptive tactile system rather than a sensing modality as a way to access the interoceptive system and to develop the first iteration of the technology. And let me tell you that at the beginning, this technology was like extremely amateur. It was like a bunch of off-the-shelf component, Arduino-based, assembled at home with my 3D printer, so something extremely simple, but still something that I can use to try to explore this question. And from literature, I could apply this technology and the stimulation to a broad range of different fields, different population, different clinical condition, and so on. Because the interoceptive system is actually broadly connected. It could enhance emotion, tackle anxiety and depression, eating disorder, PTSD. Before I show you a list of different conditions, all related to the interoceptive system. And the condition where the interoceptive system was and is disrupted, and therefore our technology could potentially apply. Therefore, the question was where to apply, what can I use this technology for, where to start? And to solve this, let's say, dilemma, I followed three simple questions. Who will benefit the most? Where does this technology have the largest and meaningful impact? And where can I measure the real effect of this technology? So I started to do research, and by research, I mean basic scientific research to understand where I could apply the science to, but also social research to understand the social impact of a possible solution in that specific field. And also epidemiological research to see the number behind a specific application. And again, I also did the marketing analysis to understand the economic side of a solution, a technological solution in that specific field. For example, if there are already 100 working solution, a new one will not change too much, right? So these are the point that I use to orient myself in the science and technology for this specific application. And cross-referencing everything, the point of Convergence was chronic pain treatments. You see, pain is a primary interoceptive input. The C-tactile stimulation has a neuromodulatory and endocrine effect on pain that could potentially suppress chronic pain. So the science behind was extremely solid. And the chronic pain is a social emergency. You probably heard about the opioid epidemic in the US and the cost it has in the societies. We have 500 million people suffering from this condition with costs that exceeds cardiovascular and oncological disease costs put together. And there are almost no solution for this. So this was the perfect point of Convergence, the perfect place to start testing the technology. I thought myself that if this technology can do something in the chronic pain field, even something small, I thought that the impact would be huge. 500 million people could benefit from this technology, and even a 1% change could have a massive and meaningful impact on the society and on the life of a lot of people. And therefore, this has been my starting point, and it worked. We have preliminary but strong evidence that 11 minutes of stimulation can reduce chronic pain independently from the pathology. And we recently secured also more funds to understand why at the biological level this happened, the long-term effect, and how to enhance this effect. But then I did something else. I look at the application, the chronic pain treatment, and I let this circle back to the science and to the technology itself. You see, I was in the lab using this technology on my chronic pain patient, and they were feeling better during the treatment. They were able to feel less pain, and they were quite surprised to feel less pain. And at the end of the experiment, almost all of them were asking me, where can I buy this technology? And my answer was always the same: you cannot buy this. This is the only prototype. You cannot find this anywhere. Only this lab has this kind of piece, and so on. So I started thinking that maybe this can be a product. This could reach the market and literally change the life of a lot of people. But then I looked at the esteemed technology, the one on the left, the white one, and I told myself that this could never do. An individual with chronic pain wants to feel better, but feeling better also means not only not having pain, but also be able to enjoy life, right? So what's the point in having less pain if you have to go to the hospital for treatment every day? your quality of life will really be better with this solution in your life. It's something that I thought a lot, and the answer for this was actually no. So I thought that I have to change this, that I have to change the technology, because the technology must be different. It has to adapt to the people needs. People do not need to adapt to the technology, to the science, to the solution. The science and the technology must adapt to them. So I start thinking backwards to the technology that doesn't need an hospital, doesn't need a clinician, doesn't need to go to a practitioner or in a research lab. And I start thinking to a technology that the user can use on their own at home. And this brought me the idea to wearable interactive technology, the one you see developed on the right on your screen. A tech that can integrate with the user daily life without interruption, providing a neuromodulatory effect, an endocrine effect, an autonomic effect, tailored on the specific user need. What I'm saying is that try to look for the practical application of your idea and let this define the science and the technology back. It seems quite obvious, but it still doesn't happen too much in the research field, in the academia. We are focused on the science, and often we forgot to think about the people that could actually benefit from this kind of science. And I think that this is also true for companies as well. There are a lot of products out there that were born before any practical application, just for the technology, just for the idea, for the sake of building something. And this brings an inverse proposition. You have a product, and then you have to find where to apply the product. This creates a bias. We are forced to squeeze your product into a field to match your need, not the people need, because you have to find a potential application for that. But when you start from the opposite side, building something, looking from the beginning to the practical application to the user need, you solve all these problems. You don't have to find the market, a potential application. Everything you are building is already be tailored in that direction. And this was my journey from the lab to something that can be a product. So let me talk in the last bit of my presentation of the possible application. Originally, my research was looking for possible non-clinical solution for chronic pain. However, after we demonstrated that our solution was, as a matter of fact, able to reduce chronic pain, we started to understand that the same technology could also be applied to different fields as well, outside the clinical setting, outside the hospital, outside the clinical population. We started to understand that the same solution could be translated, transported outside the lab and outside the hospital to improve the everyday life of people, to improve well-being also in healthy population as well. And for this section, let me show you some application. And I decided for a different approach. I will not tell you what I think this tech can do. I will show you literature evidence, scientific literature about interoceptive tactile stimulation, the kind of stimulation delivered by our technology. And I will bring you direct evidence of where this kind of stimulation can be applied. I will use reference from other research group, other labs to avoid bias. So keep in mind that everything that I'm going to show you is actually already been proved. That's the point. Therefore, we could apply directly this technology to those fields because we already have scientific evidence supporting this. We know, for example, that this kind of stimulation can modulate heart rate variability. I hope you know what heart rate variability is. And Crucially and Lasson proved this in 2017. And also our group demonstrated this in 2018 with the first prototype. So we can actually use this to modulate heart rate variability in different fields. And we can use this, for example, to enhance team working, stimulating two people at the same time, synchronizing the heart rate variability, and use this as a predictor of group cohesion and performance. We can do parasympathetic deconditioning for fears and phobias and anxiety. We can give this stimulation that has an early parasympathetic component to deconditioning the bodily response in a fear environment, for example. We can also increase the emotional value of stimuli. There is this beautiful study that proves that this kind of stimulation is able to enhance your emotional arousal, and this can be applied to art, advertising, any kind of content, to be honest. We can also support this in the reducing physiological arousal in preterm infants, a completely different field. But since once you can tackle in the heart rate variability and the autonomic component, you can do a lot of different things. For example, you can also apply this to sport and elite athletes. There are really a lot of heart rate variability biofeedback to improve recovery and performance. And our technology, this kind of stimulation, can function in the same way for sport and elite athletes. But we also know, for example, that we can apply this to stress and pain. We demonstrate that in our recent paper. And we can extend the application, for example, to stress and anxiety. There is this very recent paper in 2002, basically a few weeks ago, mechanical affective touch therapy for anxiety disorder. And for this work for anxiety disorder, it will also work, for example, for non-clinical anxiety, subclinical anxiety in healthy population that is way less severe. We can also use it for pain, treatment for pain, acute pain that can be applied, for example, on post-surgical rehab, sport injury rehab, and so on. And obviously, we can use this as a treatment for chronic pain, as our research group already demonstrated. So keep in mind that here I'm not thinking about clinical setting, about a device that has to be used in an hospital. I'm thinking about the device that people can wear in everyday life and activate without prescription or clinical supervision to improve their well-being. And all these possibilities are extremely exciting. And as I show you, these possibilities are coming from scientific literature. They are not my own personal opinion. Nonetheless, we have to keep in mind that we still have to evaluate the magnitude of this effect and to maximize them from practical purposes. Still, if you can change, and this is my last bit of this presentation, if you can change how a person feels, you can change their entire life experience. And this possibility is extremely promising and worth exploring, in my opinion. And this is the end of my presentation. I would also like to thank my team, Professor Giuseppe Riva, this is director at the Humane Technology Lab, and Elisa Zanier from Mario Negrini Institute that work with me and Joy at this project. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Dr. Di Lernia. That was fascinating and, as always, a true pleasure. I can't wait to get my hands on my own iSteam, I have to say. At this point, I'd like to remind our audience that you can submit your questions to Dr. Di Lernia in the question in the Q&A box below at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to them at the end of the event. For now, I'm happy to introduce our second speaker for this evening, Rani Cohen, co-founder and executive chairman at GrayMatters Health. GrayMatters develops digital self-neuromodulation therapeutics for mental disorders to help patients regain agency over their emotion regulation. Their first PRISM, a non-invasive adjunct therapeutic that utilizes novel neuroscience based on brain mechanism-specific biomarkers. GrayMatter technology was developed by Joy Ventures academic grantee, Professor Talma Handler, and her team at Tel Aviv Sorovsky Medical Center and Tel Aviv University. And although we can spend more than a few minutes running off Rani's highly impressive resume, Rani requested that tonight we mention 5 of his unqualifications. So here they are, kind of in his own words. Rani claims he is not fit to be a CEO because he is not organized and does not follow good management practices. He also claims he is too optimistic and that he cannot improve on this. Rani's assessment of candidates is mediocre. He tends to believe that he can help everyone improve, yet he cannot do this with everyone. If Rani would get $1 for every day he decided that he has an amazing willpower and started a diet, he would only get $3,600. And lastly, Rani also claims he's a horrible singer and that you should not invite him to our karaoke outing. So Rani, luckily for you and for us, there will be no singing tonight. And I am happy to pass you the mic.
Thank you, Tsila. And I guess also probably another thing, you shouldn't put me after a brilliant lecturer like Danielle to do lectures. Brilliant presentation, Danielle.
Thank you, Rani. It's a pleasure to have you.
So why are we here? Or actually, why do you have to suffer me lecturing to you today? And what I'm going to tell you is about a process that an entrepreneur, apparently that never had any experience in healthcare, got to the point where he's part of a company that might revolutionize mental health. So as Steve Jobs said, creativity is just connecting things or connecting the dots. Here we are with some dots that brought us here. So it all actually started with a manager of a school in Bat Yam, who got me after a lecture, which I thought was very bad, but she said, look, you're going to be a teacher next year in my school. I don't care what you teach. So I don't know anything but creativity. So I kind of invented a creativity course, which ended up being very successful, ran for 5 years. And we actually did searches for kids for patents that they invented in this course. What I learned in this engagement with kids is that there's something called ADHD, that these kids have very big difficulties in focusing. And as someone, as an entrepreneur that sees a problem, I thought I was going to solve it. So I had an idea, and I actually got some students from the Technion to try to develop it with me. And I was introduced to a professor in the Technion that told me that my idea doesn't actually go with science and what's happening in the brain. So it wasn't such a good idea, but Professor Rolls actually allowed me to get into her lab and learn about the brain, as well as accompany her with an amazing research that she did on the placebo effect. You know, an amazing thing, you know, guys, people are taking a pill of sugar and starch, and sometimes they get well from cancer. And she was looking into these mechanisms in the brain, and with 2 articles that were published later on in Nature, showed me that, hey, here's maybe a startup. And I went to search a technology that could take advantage of what Professor Rolls developed. And also with a lot of luck, I got into meeting Professor Handler, who developed the technology of gray matter. The nice thing is that I managed to put Professor Rolls and Professor Handler together, and this is where Joy come into the picture by funding this amazing research that we're not going to talk about it today. It's now finishing a clinical trial with 60 or 70 people, but it could really revolutionize immunotherapy if it is successful. Later on, Joy decided to make an investment in GrayMatters. So actually, GrayMatters is enjoying both the funding on the researchers on the university, as well as funding directly into GrayMatters. So as entrepreneurs, when you see something interesting in science, and scientists always like to explain how everything is connected only to science, But look at these results of many scientific research that look what causes cancer. So you can see here that wine usually protects against cancer, but there are some researchers that show differently. And the same about any one of these ingredients. So how do you know if something in a research is the right thing to do? Vox, which is a pretty good publication, had this title in a research that they did. Why would you believe a new announcement about a medical study? I mean, all of you guys probably heard, I think I'm not exaggerating, more than 20 times that a solution to cancer was found, and we're still not with a good solution for cancer. So what Vox did is, for example, they looked at 101 new therapies or medicine at very highly publications, and they claim that they have a new remedy or a new medicine. What they learned after 10 years after that, only 5 made it to the market, and actually only 1 ended up being a successful solution. There is a claim that, any one of you who reads scientific publications usually finds that the design of the research was not so good, so you cannot trust the results. They're saying at Vox that 85% of the 200 billion annual global spending on research is actually badly designed researches. And I will stop here, but it's very difficult to find a research that really has enough data that you can start a company on. And this is really such a bad problem that it's part of this huge mental disorder problem that we have in this world that doesn't seem to find a good solution. And this is the area where we decided to focus on. Mental health disorders, 66 million in the US, 84 million in Europe, and with an economic impact more than cancer and diabetes combined. So now I'm going to contradict myself. I'm going to show you the number of publications that focus on something that we're looking at. So if you know about mental disorders, it's very well known by the research community that an area in the brain called the amygdala is the center of emotion regulation and also instinctive reactions like fight, flight, freeze and faint, which happens to people that find themselves in a stressful situation that they are not used to. So you see the number of publications in major mental disorders that, as you may all know, don't have good solutions. So I told you before that very few of these researches really come to something productive. The good news for us is that there are tens of thousands of researchers that point to the amygdala. So the probability that this really works is above the average. One thing that we learned is that there is no single drug or medical device or behavioral treatment that targets the amygdala, which is usually hyperactive in mental disorders. What do I mean by hyperreactive? The way that you measure the amygdala activity is with fMRI. And what the fMRI measures is actually the amount of oxygen or the amount of blood coming with oxygen in any brain area. When you have a lot of blood coming compared to a person who doesn't have a problem, it's an hyperactive activation of that area. So about 15 years ago, researchers of fMRI decided to see whether a person can change their brain functionality or activity. So what they did was in real-time fMRI, they showed patients with a bar what is the activation level of their amygdala. And what they asked them to do was to try and find a mental strategy that will decrease the activity. And they could see the difference in real time. It's very equivalent to biofeedback, if you know, where they show you your heartbeat or HRV. And it's very well known for years that people can influence those dimensions. So what they learned is that people can change and regulate the activity in their brain. But the problem is, obviously, you know, if you look at psychiatrists or psychologists, you can't expect them to have an fMRI system instead of their sofa. It's expensive and takes probably too much money to build. So what Professor Handler did was to try and pass the capabilities of fMRI to a device that has is very well known to the medical community, is relatively low cost, and is not invasive, the EEG cap. And what Professor Talma Handler did was to take many subjects, put them inside an fMRI with an EEG cap, and look at their amygdala, and then through machine learning, try to see if there is a correlation between two machines that presumably are not connected. And what she did find is a correlation, which we call the electric fingerprint, the EFP. And if we looked at the amygdala, it will be the EFP of the amygdala. So now we have some kind of a biomarker of the amygdala that talks in EEG language. And in our treatment, what we do is the patient is wearing the EEG hat, and what they have in front of them is an environment that we thought is better than the bar. It's a waiting room in the hospital where the patients, the avatars here, are very angry and restless, and they shout, and the baby is crying. And the patient needs to find the mental strategy that will reduce the amygdala fingerprint. Once they're able to do that, the avatars are starting to sit down until the room is completely quiet. Now, avatars will get up and go back to the reception desk if you lose your concentration or you're moving to another area in your brain. So this is the technology that I found, and what we had to do was to decide when to start. Now, I'm not a researcher. Professor Handler didn't know me, and one of the most important things to start in the beginning is to develop trust. Part of the trust was things that I had to do myself. I found very quickly that this is actually the first startup that I have in healthcare. And I learned that the language and the procedures are much different than in the high-tech world. So very quickly, I asked some of my VC friends to find me a partner. And luckily they found Odette Kraft, who is now the CEO of the company. So also I'm not a good CEO. Odette is a phenomenal CEO. So now it was the two of us against or in front of Talma. And what we learned is that the technology has huge potential, but needs to get a lot of verification from the market. And you guys are probably familiar with a minimum viable product. This is a term that I invented yesterday. I call it minimal viable research. Is the research large enough or strong enough for investors to invest in the company? And Odette and myself decided that it wasn't. We had to wait for more substantial research that Professor Handler did in order to be able to go to investors, look them in the eye and say, it's dangerous, there's risk, but it's not completely a risk that is, we cannot even comprehend how risky this is. So once we got to this point, and I will explain more about this point later, now you have another difficulty, and it's different in every institution. You need to get into a licensing agreement with the research institute. It can be very hard. It can be it can be easier. It's never easy to get into this agreement. The agreement needs to take into consideration that you are a company that needs to make profits. So when you do this agreement, you need to make sure that you're fair to the institution, to the university, but there are enough profits left for the company to be very interesting for an IPO or for a merger with a larger company. This is an inflection point for funding. It's very difficult not to get funding for such ideas without the minimal viable research and the licensing agreement with the institute. Now we go back to trust. You have to continue and work with the research team, and during the licensing agreement and later, you have to understand that you have to give the researchers the academic freedom. They are not, when they develop something, they're not there to make a profit. They're really there to find new technologies that could change the world. And this is something that you need to keep supporting them. And this is contradictory to business decisions sometimes. So this is, again, trust is very important here. And the decision when to allow academic research to be published or keep it secret until you write a patent is something not easy. The next phase is the knowledge transfer. And this is also a major task. The reason is that it's not only the professor that needs to give you the information. Usually, you're looking at several researches that were done and were led by the major inventor, but the rest was done by PhDs that are now in their postdoc in all over the world, or students that did only their master's degrees and got an offer from a high-tech company, and now they're working in a completely different environment, and they need to give you the knowledge. So this is something that you need to also carefully build, and it's extremely important because without it, you lose a lot of knowledge. The last thing is that, as much as there is trust and knowledge transfer, and it's very important to listen to the researchers. You have to listen, share what you have with them, but at the end you have to make business decisions. It's not easy sometimes. You might find things in the research that don't work as you expect to work, and you need to make sometimes decisions that circumvent the research to a different direction. And when you come to these decisions, you have to make them. And it's very good if you're able to do that with the trust of the leading investigators. So going back to the minimal viable research, we waited nearly 3 years until we felt there was enough research for GrayMatters to go for the funding. The first major research that came out was published on the cover of Nature, and it was done with, it was an immense project with 180 subjects, which is really rare in academic research. And later, and this was on healthy people. Once this was done, which was very impressive, we still waited to see how the technology worked on people with mental disorders. And what happened is that Professor Handler did research on nearly 80 patients with PTSD, which ended up being very successful. And this is where we felt comfortable to look for seed funding for the company. Just to give you perspective on what is done, this was published on Nature, 180 soldiers during a boot camp, a stressful period, a healthy individual, a superb research with respect to the subject being on the same age, eating the same thing, sleeping the same time. It's very rare to do such research. And what we learned is that when we measured the stress level of the soldiers at the beginning of the boot camp, and besides the technology that I told you about, the amygdala, we also had the same waiting room, but with alpha theta, which is the most used neurofeedback treatment that kind of resembles meditation. It's relaxing, not any medical acknowledgement on this, but it's definitely relaxing. And so 90 soldiers were on the amygdala EFP, 45 on the neurofeedback with meditation, and 45 were a control group. What you can see is that in full numbers, the guys that were the control group, their stress level was nearly up by 20%. The meditation works. It's only 5% more, which is not statistically significant. So they had the same stress level at the beginning and the end of the boot camp. And the amygdala guys were 15% less stressed by the end of the treatment. 3 months after, we took them to an fMRI. 30 people who trained to do the amygdala, and 26 that did the other treatments. And what you can see is that this was the average amygdala of the EFP. The amygdala guys, they managed to, inside an fMRI, to reduce their amygdala. The no treatment group actually was interesting. Their average amygdala was higher, but when they tried to deactivate their amygdala, the signal actually got stronger. And we think it's because of frustration, because they didn't manage to do that. this was not published yet, so we're not showing the numbers, but 80 PTSD patients. I have to say that you may know that PTSD has two stages. The stage one is acute, where people might get PTSD, but it stops after 1 year. And the chronic is a PTSD that you're hearing about soldiers or women that got raped that continues sometimes forever. Our average PTSD time is 8 years. So people that are chronic with their PTSD, and we had 80 subjects, and we had the results were that nearly 38% of them got a clinical improvement after the treatment. The treatment is half an hour twice a week for 7 weeks. That's it. What was really surprising and made us very happy is that after 6 months, without additional training, it went up to nearly 60%. And this is explained by the plasticity of the brain. When you learn to do something and you keep doing it, it becomes part of you, and it's easier for you to do this thing. So if you look at us from a company point of view, I met Talma at 2016, end of 2016. And this is when we started the company, February 2020. We developed the product and made it into, by the FDA standards, while looking at all the regulatory strategy of the company. And at Q4 2020, just started the study with COVID, which didn't make it easy for us. We worked with in Israel with Rambam, Sheba, Be'er Yaakov, and Barzilai, and with NYU Langone, one of the major centers of PTSD in the US. We were surprised by the stickiness of the clients. This is something that will be published soon, but we had usually people with mental health drop significantly from any clinical trials, and we had a very small attrition rate. And we actually are just finishing our trial, and we expect to submit to the FDA sometimes by the end of June, and hopefully get an FDA approval by the end of the year. It will be the first ever neurofeedback treatment that gets an FDA approval, and hopefully we will be able to get the same results, or cross our fingers, even a little bit better than what Talma had in her research on the 80 patients. While doing this, and we talked a little bit about the amygdala all the time, we also, with McLean Hospital, which is a Harvard Medical School hospital, one of the top institutions in the world for mental health, we're starting a study with our technology on MDD. And at one point in time, we want to be able to allow the EEG technology to be available even at home for patients. At the beginning of 2022, we got a seed A of $10 million. The seed was $3.5 million. Series A was $10 million. It was led by Otsuka Medical Devices, which is a sister company of Otsuka, one of the largest Japanese pharmaceutical companies. From a technology point of view, we're looking at evidence-based brain areas that are associated with mental health disorders. So if we look at the amygdala, you can see that the amygdala is associated with post-trauma, borderline personality disorder, general anxiety disorder, and even ADHD. So this is this area of the brain. We've completed this study, and actually a study on borderline personality disorder is done in ZI Mannheim in Germany now. We have developed the EFP of the ventral striatum, or the reward system, and we're going after a huge market of the depression, and this is done with McLean Hospital. And now, since people are starting to know about technology, we're being approached by all these to cooperate on different disorders on the brain. We were kind of in stealth mode from February 2020 until May 2021, and since then we won actually a huge amount of awards, including Bird Foundation with Harvard, with McLean. We won the first place of the US government, Department of Commerce, Select USA, for bringing technology to the US. Nature magazine chose the company as one of the top eight companies that did what the lecture that we're talking about is doing, spin-off based on academic research. So we got recognition for that. And this is soon to be published, but we got the announcement, we got €2.5 million from the EAC program as a grant to develop the technology and bring it to Europe. So this is our journey so far, and waiting for questions.
Thank you, Rani, for the great presentation. And we do have a couple of questions from the audience, but we are a little over time, so let's try to keep it short and sweet. I have my first question that I have here is for Daniele, but I kind of feel like this might be a secret sauce question. Daniele, the first question is, what is the exact stimulation that the device is producing?
It's not secret sauce because it's already on the literature, scientific literature. It's like actually touch. The point is that is a kind of touch that responds to specific parameters in terms of pattern of stimulation, force, velocity, and so on. So that the challenge was for the device to actually be an actuator and a sensor able to measure the extremely small variation that we need to specifically activate those receptors. Because if you miss them, you go in a completely different area of the brain and you lose all the useful effect. So basically touch, but a very specific kind of touch. I was enough.
Beautiful, as always, just on point, exact and precise. I have more questions, but let's direct the next one to Rani. Rani, could the same pipeline of the amygdala EFP be generalized to other brain structures and other disorders?
So yes, we have the electric fingerprint of the ventral striatum with Harvard, and this is what we're doing for MDD, for depression, and especially for anhedonic depression. It's depression patients that cannot enjoy anything. And unfortunately, enjoyment is a very simple thing in the brain. You need to get some dopamine, and they just cannot activate this network. And this is what we're trying to show them. And it's a different UI to try to help them find their reward system and activate it.
Beautiful, thank you. So I'm going to do another quick one for Daniele. Since Rani mentioned the licensing process and how challenging it could be, we were wondering how you plan on handling the licensing and IP issues.
For me or for Rani? I
For,
think
this
Rani.
is actually, this one was directed to you.
Okay. Basically, we have an agreement with the hosting institution of the project regarding the IP and the commercial rights for the technology. So it's something that has already been put in motion. And for example, the patent has been registered on my name because it was developed outside the university. These allow a lot of freedom in working with this.
Brilliant. Okay, there's more, but I feel we're kind of over time. So maybe we'll just direct the questions we have directly to you guys after the event. I want to thank you so much to you, the speakers, for generously devoting your time to share your journey and insights with our community. To our audience members, thank you. And if you're a researcher working on exciting innovation, or an entrepreneur or an inspiring entrepreneur with a passion to our field, we invite you to get in touch by dropping us a line at an email posted at the chat box. And if you haven't already, we also encourage you to subscribe to our mailing list through our website to get updates on more events in the series and to hear about future opportunities and programs at Joy. We always have something up our sleeve. So thank you everyone for joining us, and have a great evening.
Thank you, Silla. Thank you, everybody. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Rani.
Thank
Bye.
you.